U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo sitting down with our own Hadley before his trip to Brussels to discuss some of the most pressing geopolitical matters, including Iran and China. Hadley joins us now with more. Hadley.
Hey, good morning, Morgan. So essentially what we've seen over the last 24 hours or so is U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo canceling the first leg of his Russia trip, his trip to Moscow, to head to Brussels instead and meet with the big E3, these European leaders, to talk directly about Iran. Now, this is something that we've seen over the last several days. As you know, the U.S. military presence in the Persian Gulf has been amping up. We've been bolstering that presence. I asked the Secretary of State, are you worried about a potential miscalculation with all of that military hardware in such a small bottle of water? And he was essentially saying, hey, we are not going to miscalculate. We fully understand what we're doing. But the big question, of course, going forward is, could they potentially get the Europeans on side here? You'll remember, of course, that Iran again and again has sought out the help of the Europeans in terms of trying to keep the nuclear deal together. They want some help from the Europeans. And frankly, the Trump administration has sat back and wondered why, according to the Secretary of State, that European corporates seem to understand what we're trying to do in terms of the sanctions regime. But at the same point, European governments do not. Now, I do want to mention in this wide-ranging interview, we talked about Russia, we talked about North Korea, China, Venezuela as well. And I tried to get a sense from the Secretary of State, what exactly is the Trump doctrine? Listen in.
What President Trump has done is we've spoken the truth, right? Previous administrations just ignored China. We've called them out. They ignored the fact that intellectual property was being stolen. We have tried to push back against it, and we will. They've had forced technology transfer in China. They have 1 million Uyghurs being detained. Previous administration turned a blind eye. We won't. Previous administration saw that NATO countries weren't paying their fair share. This administration has called it out. Previous administrations allowed the Human Rights Commission at the United Nations to be occupied by some of the most grotesque human rights abusers in the world. Previous administrations wouldn't call it out. We're realistic. We understand the world as it is, and we're working to make it better in every one of those forums.
I don't know about you guys. But this to me screams realpolitik at its best. And the interesting thing about that, when you talk about China and the United States, for the foreign ministers of the world, and certainly for our Secretary of State, they are looking at this from a much broader lens, because it's not just for them about this trade war. It's also about ensuring that Xi Jinping, Chinese leader, actually continues to have the respect and the popularity back at home. And that, of course, plays into the North Korea narrative, because if the North Koreans feel that the Chinese premier doesn't have the clout that he once did, that takes away a very, very big stick for the United States when it comes to tackling North Korea, guys. So these things don't happen in a vacuum, as you know, and certainly the Secretary of State seems to be at least on it when it comes to the Iran file, as well as what's happening with China on this massive trip that he's taking from Russia, of course, to Brussels and then back to Russia to meet Russia's leaders.